to it, I remember was it's probably 20 years ago or something. And when the first idea that I heard that you could carry cash value inside of life insurance was a weird idea for me, because all I knew before that was term insurance. If you die, they pay out. Why do we need anything different, right? But as I got into the industry and got learning about what it is and how it works and how it can work. So what we're going to describe today is very different than what you would get if you went down the street to your local agent and said, hey, show me some whole life insurance, right? Once I understood the value of it, which I would say was probably 12 years ago, and especially using it in the way that we're going to describe tonight in conjunction with investments. We call it the investment optimizer, right? To just make our investments a little bit better.
Yeah. Nice.
It just kind of changed my whole outlook in the way that money flows in and out of investments. And it all just kind of developed into what we're doing today.
Yeah, very cool. Brennan, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I was actually working as a sales manager back east in Connecticut, and I had just recently gotten married, and my father-in-law sat me down, and he actually is in the business. And so he sat me down and started explaining to me different kinds of life insurance. And then he started talking about how you can utilize your life insurance for, either investments. What he actually described was using your life insurance to buy a car at some point. And I was like, well, what do you mean you're going to use your life insurance to buy a car? And so then he walked me through, well, if the credit union is charging 3% interest, instead you can take the loan from your insurance policy, buy the car cash, and then just funnel that back into your insurance policy. And he kind of did the math with me and showed the difference between what you would pay to the credit union and what you would be earning in your policy if you did it the other way.
Right.
And that was my initial introduction. And that's kind of what set me down the rabbit hole of, wow, life insurance isn't just a death benefit. There are plenty of living benefits to be utilized as well.
Yeah. I love that. So I'll set the stage and we'll get started here for everyone else. It's about 7:04. These guys are insanely intelligent when it comes to structuring these deals, and we want to talk about how these work, why they work, how they work tonight. One of the things I'd like to do, though, just to set the stage, is everyone that's on the call is really part of the SHRED method. So they're using SHRED, they understand the model. And so you all know, I was introduced to SHRED about 10 or 12 years ago and started using it. I've since paid off my house twice in the last 8 years. And every time that we pay it off, we would redeploy money and we would deploy it into a cash value life insurance plan. And these guys will understand why we're doing that, or you will understand why we're doing that. I'll let them explain the benefits of it all. But the way that I would describe this is there is a 3-step process that I like to talk about, and I call it the 10-year freedom plan. And the 10-year freedom plan, in my estimation, anyone could be financially free in 10 years if you use SHRED first, you go into cash value life insurance second, and you leverage the cash that you have in those accounts to then go deploy into my favorite things are things like syndications, real estate syndications, and other cash flow producing opportunities. So these guys are really going to talk about what step 2 in the 10-year freedom plan is all about. You'll hear some words or some terms interconnected and interspersed. Infinite banking is what it's probably typically known as in the market, cash value life insurance. And what Rod and Brennan are going to talk about is the investment optimizer, which essentially is using cash value life insurance to really turn on the afterburners in terms of wealth creation. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys and let you share screen and go through slides.
Okay.
We're going to have some questions. So I know there's like 20, 25 minutes of content, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if any of you have questions, make sure you're either posting them in the chat, and Nick Durr, give a wave. Nicholas is going to be our question watcher, and make sure that we get all those answered after that 20, 25 minute mark. So with that, Rod and Brennan, the floor is yours.
Sweet. Okay, so I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And what I'm going to do is first maybe build on a couple things that you said here just a minute ago. and then I'll kind of let Brennan take over. So as you can see here, adding another layer of profitability to your investments. And people will ask us, okay, well, what investments? Like, what can I be investing in through this? Really at anything. So we have people who are investing in real estate. You mentioned syndications. We have a lot of people who are investing in real estate syndications. Other things like their own businesses or other people's businesses, or crypto, or really a lot of different things. So when you talk about shredding and then starting to take that money and going out and investing, this quite literally can just plug into whatever someone is doing or is planning to do with their investing, regardless of what that is. It's just going to make that better, add another layer of profitability to that. And then the second thing, you kind of mentioned some of the things people might hear about infinite banking and whatnot. And we consider ourselves maybe like a subset of infinite banking. In other words, the purists out there of infinite banking would talk about using loans for all kinds of stuff. Brennan talked about using it to go buy a car. I've heard about people using it to go on vacation, to pay their taxes, to do all kinds of different things, right? And it can be valuable for those things. But just to maybe differentiate or we get really narrowly focused on what we're going to talk about is using the strategy for investing. That's what we're going to talk about and focus on today, regardless of what you're investing in. It is really valuable for that. All right, Brennan, you want to take us away?
Yeah, awesome. So we're excited to talk to you about the Investment Optimizer today. And really, the Investment Optimizer is one of the core philosophies that we have at Money Insights. And maybe to set the stage, our goal, we're not changing anything that we're doing on the investment side. Everything that we're doing in terms of investing into real estate or syndications, alternative assets is what we call it, anything that really has a cash flow to it. We're not changing any of that. What we're doing is just changing the flow of money in and out of those investments. And so traditionally, when most people are investing in those kinds of assets, they'll have what we refer to as an opportunity fund. And that's just the place that they will store capital until the next deal comes up. And most of the time, the problem with those accounts is they need those accounts to be safe, predictable, and liquid. And so it usually ends up being a checking, savings, or a money market account is what most people are kind of traditionally using for their opportunity fund. And what we're going to be talking about today is the Investment Optimizer, which is another option for the opportunity fund. And kind of the key benefits and the problems that we're solving by using the Investment Optimizer is we're still able to keep our opportunity fund liquid, meaning we have immediate access to the cash when we need it, when that deal comes up. In addition to that, it's safe, right? There's some inherent risks that are when we have our opportunity fund in maybe in crypto or in the stock market, there are some risks with that, right? If that money goes down or we have a negative return in any given year, we don't want to pull that money out to invest in a deal. So we got to make sure that it's liquid and safe. In addition to that, we want our money to grow for us, right? Well, in a checking, savings, money market, we're not going to see very much growth. And when that money does grow at the end of the year, we're going to get a 1099. Well, that leads me into the next benefit that we're solving is that there's a lot of tax benefits with the Investment Optimizer. We're able to access our dollars tax-free and get them to grow tax-free so that we can access those dollars at any point. And in addition to that, probably the most exciting aspect of the Investment Optimizer and what people are intrigued the most is that we're able to create multiple benefits by using the same dollars at the same time, but getting a return in two different places. So very literally, we're able to invest in our real estate deals and continue to earn interest in our opportunity fund. And so to kind of talk through that and to get the conversation started, Rod's prepared a few numbers to kind of walk through and get us going that way.
Yeah, perfect. And the way that I think Adam described this as kind of dovetailing into the shred method, the way that I envision it is you've kind of shredded that debt, and now you've freed up cash flow. So if I no longer have a mortgage payment, that's a couple grand a month that I have that I can be putting somewhere else, well, I'm going to be building an opportunity fund, right, to go out and invest in other things. So basically this now plugs in as that opportunity fund for that. And with this example that Brennan mentioned, what we want to do is just show, like, if we're saying that that the investment optimizer is better than just kind of building this up in the savings account, well, we want to put our money where our mouth is, right? So in this example, what we're going to show is somebody who's setting aside $100,000 a year for 5 years to capitalize their opportunity fund. They're using that money initially to invest in a syndication. And then subsequently, we're going to show if they're going out and purchasing their own real estate assets, in this case, multifamily. And when they do that, they'll purchase the property. 80% of that will come from a traditional lender, and the other 20% is the down payment. And that 20% down payment is what they're using from the investment optimizer. Okay. And then we're assuming that we get a 15% cash flow from the investment, and that we're experiencing a 5% appreciation on the properties. Now, I always say this because sometimes when I show these numbers, I'll get one person on the left hand saying, "Oh man, I only wish I could always get 15% cash flow," and somebody on my right hand saying, "I would never do a deal if I didn't get at least 15%." And then same thing on the appreciation. So I only point that out because I'm not as much suggesting that this is what any one individual is experiencing, as much as for this example to show side by side, apples to apples, the investment experience being the same. All we're doing is substituting in the investment optimizer in place of the savings account. Okay.
Hey, Rod, real quick.
Yep.
One of the things I might throw in there too, and obviously it will change the numbers, but for anyone who's looking at that on the call tonight, that's like 100 grand, how am I ever going to save that much a year? Even if it's 10% of that, we can still show you examples that really head spin. And as you're using Shred, one of the things you'll notice is that as the mortgage is paid down, your ability to leverage even 25,000 at a time from the HELOC into an optimizer account is still there, right? So look at the numbers that Rod and Brennan have put together, but also know that we can run projections at whatever your numbers are and help you strategize some of that. So
yeah, that's a great point. And it's very linear as well. In other words, we optimize the plan to each individual at the level that they're doing it. So again, if it's a $10,000 a year number that we're setting aside, then just basically take 10% of the stuff that, the numbers that you're seeing here. And that's basically what you would apply to your situation. Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you for that. Okay, so with this 100,000 a year going in for 5 years, on the left-hand side going in toward the investment optimizer, on the right-hand side going in towards a savings account. But we don't wait to start investing. In this example, we don't have to. We can start even in year one with the investment. Now, you might be looking at that and saying, okay, Rod, on the right-hand side, I have 100,000 going into my syndication. On the left-hand side, I have 74. I thought you said this is going to be better, right? Well, because we're using life insurance, there are costs up front. And we'll talk about that again, how we design it to minimize the costs, but again, we don't get rid of them. However, in the long run, because we're creating a consistent growth that's tax-free, and we're using that to go out and leverage and invest, eventually we get to a place where we're creating a lot more value on the left-hand side. We overcome those initial costs. Think of it like startup costs for a business or initial investment costs to go out and buy a piece of real estate or whatever, right? So a lot of parallels with this, but the idea is that over time, we just end up in a much better place than we would have been if we didn't take on those initial costs and make this happen. In this example, at the end of 20 years, once we've invested in the syndication and then multiple properties, and essentially what we're doing is we're investing in the properties, we're creating cash flow. We capture all of that cash flow, flow it back into the policy, paying down the loans, so to speak. The way I think of it strategically is replenishing the opportunity fund to go back out and invest in the next property, continue to flow all that cash back through it. And as you see, over time, we just end up being able to invest in larger and larger properties, so that by the end of the 20 years, we've created a $2 million difference by using the investment optimizer versus the savings account. Now let me be just really clear. The real estate is really doing most of the work here, right? Even on the right-hand side, we turned our 500,000 into $20 million worth of value. But if I can, instead of having 20, if I can have 22 million, well, I'll take that, right? By flowing the money in a different way. And then like Adam said, adjust that to your numbers. If it's 10,000 a year for those first 5 years and you turn that into a $200,000 difference, why wouldn't I want that? So hopefully this gives you a feel going in. We're going to get into the details. We'll break it down, but hopefully this at least gives you a feel for the power behind what we're going to talk about. Okay, so Brennan, why don't you go ahead and jump in on the vehicle?
Yes. So let's talk about the vehicle we're using. So what we're using is a max overfunded dividend paying whole life insurance policy. And every time I say that, it feels like it takes longer and longer to get through the name of it. But the reason we don't just call it a whole life insurance policy is because this is a very specialized kind of whole life insurance policy that we're building. What we're doing is we're minimizing the costs and maximizing the cash value inside the policy. And by doing that, we're able to create a very efficient vehicle for our opportunity fund. We're able to get net up to a 5% return, and that's going to be a tax-free return. So we mentioned before the tax benefits. Well, one of the main tax benefits of the opportunity fund being in the investment optimizer is that we're able to get tax-free growth. In addition to that, it's very safe and predictable. The kind of insurance companies that we're using have been around for a really long time. In fact, well over 100 years, and they're very consistent in paying dividends, and we just know exactly what's going to happen inside these whole life policies because we've had such a long runway and track record of looking back at these companies. We're also able to keep our liquidity, so we're able to access that cash any point at any time for any reason. And one of the other benefits of having it in the investment optimizer is there is a death benefit as well. And while the death benefit isn't the main focus is obviously creating a much more efficient vehicle for our opportunity fund. There is going to be a death benefit. And that death benefit can be used in multiple ways, but at some point, ideally at age 85 or 90 or 95 or whatever your family's longevity is, there will be a tax-free death benefit to your family as well, which can play into different estate planning tools as well. And then lastly, there's a loan provision. So the way that we're going to be accessing our cash value is we're going to be strategically using this loan provision to access the cash, not only because the cash will then come out tax-free, but that's what's going to help us create multiple value in two different places with the same dollar. And so I want to dive into kind of the flow of money and how that works next. And so what happens, and maybe it's important to walk through really quick how your insurance policy is earning interest. It really earns interest in two different ways. The first way that it earns interest is a guaranteed rate. And that guaranteed rate, it's contractual, and it can be anywhere, depending on the insurance company we use, it can be anywhere from a 2% up to 3.75%. And then in addition to that, because we're using a mutual life insurance company, we also get a dividend. And so the guaranteed rate plus the dividend usually right now ends up being right around 5%, 5.5% in terms of a growth rate inside the policy. And so what we're doing is we're going to funnel our money from our bank account or whatever our opportunity fund is that we're using, and we're going to funnel it into our insurance policy. And once we funnel that money into our insurance policy, when we want to take a loan and invest, because we have this opportunity fund, this whole life insurance policy, we get access to this much larger bucket of money, which is the general account of the insurance company. And so when we take a loan from our insurance policy, the money comes from the general account. Now, our opportunity fund, our whole life policy, is still sitting there, and the dollars in there are acting as collateral for the loan. But the important part is that those dollars inside the policy are continuing to earn compounding interest. And so the money comes out of the general account of the insurance company in the form of a loan. We then take that loan and invest it into our cash flowing asset, piece of real estate or a syndication. And then what we're going to do is, as that cash flow kicks out, just like we would with any other opportunity fund, we're going to flow those dollars back in strategically to replenish our opportunity fund, so that we can then repeat this process over and over again, and continue to earn interest in two different places with the same dollars. So this line that comes down is representing the separation between the interest and showing that our money is now working for us in the whole life insurance policy. But not only that, it's working for us in our cash flowing asset.
Perfect. Okay. So next, what we want to do is, obviously we've been talking a lot about leveraging, like we get the money in the policy, we leverage it to go out and invest. And what I want to do is kind of describe one thing that's happening that I think really creates a powerful benefit for us as it relates to leverage. So we talked about the tax-free growth. We talked about creating value in multiple places at the same time. The third thing is we're actually going to be creating an arbitrage between paying simple interest on our loan versus earning compounding interest inside of our policy. And I think as a general rule, a lot of people understand the difference between compound and simple. In this case, this left-hand side shows a general compound curve. What's interesting on this one is this, on the right-hand side, that simple interest, it's not just a flat line. In other words, we're not just paying only the interest, but as we pay down that loan, we're actually paying simple interest on a decreasing value. In other words, we invested, we created that cash flow. That cash flow is flowed back in here to pay down the loan. Like I said earlier, I'm replenishing the opportunity fund to go do it again. But what I want to do is break down the numbers on this so we can see really the power between the two, the difference between the compound and the simple. So first I want to do is say, okay, let's just take it as an example. Let's say we took a $100,000 loan to go out and invest in a syndication, for example. And let's say based on the cash flow that I'm just amortizing the payback of that loan over 20 years. So I have a $8,000 a year payment. And when I fast forward to the end of the 20 years, once I've paid off that loan, I will have paid a total of about $60,000 in interest on that loan. Okay. Well, simultaneously, I have $100,000 sitting in my cash value acting as collateral against that loan, and it's growing. Let's assume it's the same 5% rate that I was paying on the loan. Okay, so I'm earning 5%. You would think that's a wash, right? I'm earning exactly what I'm paying. But because there's of this difference, this is growing at a compounding rate. When I fast forward to the end of the 20 years, I will have earned a total of $165,000 of interest compounding inside of that bucket from the left. So put those side by side, 165 here, 60,000 here. So again, I think people understand the difference, but I think it is really helpful to just put some numbers to it and really see the power of this simple example where we netted out $100,000 more of value in what we were growing inside of the policy versus that interest that we were putting on the loan to keep up with that side. And just to be clear on this, when we are paying on these loans, we actually get to decide how we want to pay. In other words, to me, what makes the most sense is however I've invested those funds, whatever cash flow I'm creating or return, however that comes back to me, that's what I'm going to use to flow back towards my loan. But it's completely up to me to determine that how I pay back that loan. In other words, the cash value that's there acting as collateral, it's there, it's with the insurance company anyway. So they leave it up to me to decide how I want to pay off that loan, which makes a huge difference in the way that I can invest and use those funds and flow the money back.
I have a question for you, Rod.
Okay, hit me.
What happens if I can get a better interest rate from the bank?
Oh, that's a great question. And it leads right into the next slide. It's amazing. Okay. So one thing that, especially recently, we've been able to do where we can get better interest rates at the bank. Who knows how long that'll last? We'll see how that goes. But for now, we're still, even with the recent rise in interest rates, it still is more advantageous. What I can do is, remember that big bucket on the right-hand side? I can substitute a line of credit with the bank in place of the general account of the insurance company. So I'm still using a loan. I'm still flowing the money through that loan. But instead, what I've done is I've set up a line of credit with the bank using my cash value of my policy as collateral so that in this case, so that I can pay less interest on the loan. And again, the cash value is still growing the same. I tell people, hey, check with your own bank to see if it's something that they do. If not, we have a list of banks that we know do this, and we can help you do that. But again, like I said, as interest rates go up, and who knows how high they're going to go, but we can switch them out. So we can move back and forth between using loans with the insurance company's general account versus using loans with the bank. But let me just kind of give you an example of the difference. So a minute ago, we talked about the $165,000 I'm earning on that $100,000 that I had sitting in my cash value. Well, on that same loan, if instead I had this cash value line of credit, I would have paid only $34,000 on the loan instead of the 60 that I was showing in that example. So again, interest rates are changing right now. Who knows how long this part will last. But what I do know is it'll ebb and flow, right? Sometimes it will be more advantageous for me to use the policy loan with the insurance company. Sometimes it'll be more advantageous to use the bank loan, and I can freely switch between the two. But as I do that, remember that earlier, the side-by-side example we showed, the $100,000 a year for 5 years turning into $2 million of a difference. Well, in this example, by switching out and using the cash value line of credit with the bank instead of just the general account with the insurance company, I'm able to create a little more than $3 million worth of value of difference between the two. So obviously that can be an enormous additional benefit when it makes sense. Okay. All right. So now let me just kind of circle back, hit on the key takeaways from what we've touched on. So we talked about adding a layer of profitability for investors, shred, and then go out and invest and use the investment optimizer to add an additional layer. We can do it tax-free. I know we keep coming back to that, but I don't know if we can say it too many times. The growth of the policy as we're using it. And then eventually when we pass away, same thing, tax-free. It's very safe and predictable. It comes with a level of creditor protection. We didn't spend a lot of time on this, but cash value life insurance in almost all states carries with it a level of creditor protection. In other words, if you get sued, the money that's in your cash value policy is not included in that. Okay. And then the last piece here, a lot of times people will say, okay, that's great. I built a lot of value inside of this policy, but for what? Well, phase 2 is using those dollars as a source of tax-free income in retirement. So let's say with your investing, you've created some really cool streams of income with your real estate. Well, this can become another stream of income, again, tax-free. So that makes a difference as well. All right, that's kind of that presentation side of it. But we would love to get into any questions that anybody has.
So we're definitely going to open this up for questions. I want to make just one or two quick comments.
Yep.
I met Brennan, and first I met Brennan, and I met Rod through Brennan at a conference called RubeCon, which is the Real Estate Wealth Builders Conference. And when I described what I was doing and Brennan described what he was doing, it was very clear that there was a close match. And at the very least, even an ability to stack these strategies one on top of the other and really create some really dynamic wealth building opportunities in a short amount of time. And I don't, as Rod and Brennan have just shown, this is a 20-year time frame. And I'm not saying that we necessarily will advance that any amount of time, because obviously compound interest needs to work. But when you're using Shred and you're using the investment optimizer, your ability to build the opportunity fund within the investment optimizer, the cash value life insurance, is accelerated. So we've had a number of clients who said, oh man, if only I could put money in a policy like that. And they had a $50,000 or $100,000 line of credit that they were only leveraging maybe $20,000 on. And we started running the numbers on, what if you put 25 grand a year for 4 years in a policy like that, or 10 years for that matter? How quickly could you build the wealth? And then once that opportunity fund is built there, we start introducing other opportunities that you can put it into that candidly will kind of blow your mind, as Rod alluded to. 15% returns. Many of these, the risk is pretty mitigated. So it's a whole nother level. We do have some questions coming in though, Rod.
Awesome.
Colleen Dwyer says, I have a policy already. Can I utilize it for the program?
Part of it depends on what type of life insurance policy is. If it's a whole life and you have cash value, then yes, all the companies will allow you to loan against it. If it's what's called universal life, and if it's like an index universal life, then yes. If it's variable, meaning that it's actually invested in the stock market, then maybe. That's a little more volatile, and therefore it may or may not be accessible. But anyway, to the extent that it is whole life or index universal life, then yes, you could.
And Colleen mentioned it's Guardian, and it's a 1090 split.
Okay. Yeah. So Guardian doesn't do VUL to my knowledge, so it sounds like it is absolutely something you could use. Yeah.
Omo asked the question, is this opportunity open to folks in Canada?
Great question. For anyone out of the country, part of it depends on if you're doing business in the US, like if you have a business structure in the US and or if you own properties or things like that, then we can make that happen. There is one company in particular that is very friendly to, you don't have to be a US citizen or whatever. That if we have some presence in the US, then we can make that happen.
Okay, very good. Other questions? Romania has a good point, guys. Unfortunately, syndication real estate is only available to accredited investors. She is working her way towards being one, but is it possible to do other cash flow investment deals, real estate deals, and not be accredited?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like I mentioned in the beginning, anything that you're investing in, this can be used for. And we actually do know in syndicators that have, they'll open up a portion of their deals to non-accredited investors. To your point, Romania, it's not as common, but we do see it. So I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction if that's something that you're interested in looking at while you're building up to becoming an accredited investor. But anyway, the answer to the question is that, yeah, we see people use it in all kinds of ways. There's a note fund that we're familiar with that generates about a 7% return consistently year in and year out. And we have people using that. So again, a lot of different things that people are doing.
Yeah, that's great. One example of that, Rod, that I could share. There's a Romania is very interested, by the way. She's ready for that referral whenever you have it. Rod.
Okay, absolutely.
There's a short-term rental strategist that's a good friend of ours at the Shred Method. And he came to me and he said, hey, we may have an opportunity for people that have anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000 that they'd like to put somewhere. And effectively what they're doing is they're using, let's say it's $10,000. They're using it to set up a handful of apartments on the Airbnb platform. And so they're essentially creating rental arbitrage where they will rent 4 or 5 units side by side, turn them into Airbnb properties, and then they will split the return with whomever is giving them the $10,000 to $40,000, depending on how many units they have to set up, at a 70-30 split. 70% goes to the person providing the funding until they're paid back. And then once it's paid back, it's a 50-50 split with this co-host. So that's Romania. That's where you could take 10 grand out of a policy like that and leverage it into an investment that may not be traditional, but is likely going to be pretty successful given these folks' track record. So that's just another option. Trish asked, do you recommend starting while you're shredding a mortgage or after? And I'm going to field this one, you guys, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Absolutely.
I think the answer that I would give you, Trish, is you want to shred for a period of time until you have a certain level of equity in the property and you've got a HELOC big enough that you could drop 25 or 50 or 100 grand at a time in a policy without it really taxing your personal financial situation. So I'll give you a case in point. My wife and I, when we shredded our mortgage, and we had about $100,000 on a line of credit that was available to us, we started taking $25,000 at a time, year over year, and plugging it into what we would call an infinite banking policy. We would call here investment optimizer policy. So within about 4 years, we had $110,000 because we had some dividends and interest earned. And we took that money and then we started investing that in real estate deals. And I put it into my business to invest in something else, just kind of a level 202 about how you do that. But there's so many options on how to do this. I think one of the best ways for someone just getting started in Shred is to see your mortgage balance go down. So you're creating more income efficiency until you have a level of equity available that you can go into something like this. For most of you on this webinar, you're probably going to be there in 12 to 14, maybe 18 months on the long end. So, you know, I'm not saying you got to wait a long time, but I would wait a while until you have that equity available. Yeah, great question. So one of the reasons that I'm curious your guys' take on this, I see a lot of agents that will sell this product. They don't know exactly what they're selling. They're going to structure it, you know, whatever way they know how to, but maybe not the way that it needs to be. And if you guys could describe what is different about an overfunded, max funded cash value policy like this that's dividend paying versus some of the others that might be out there.
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one. So in a traditional whole life policy, run of the mill, you know, something that 90 to 95% of people have probably seen, and a lot of the Dave Ramsey's or Susie Armand's may have talked about. Most of those policies are built. It's not that they're built in a bad way, but they're just structured more for death benefit. They're purchasing an insurance policy, and the agent is structuring the policy for the death benefit, not focusing on the cash value. And most agents or advisors really just don't know or understand how to structure a policy the correct way. And so what ends up happening is in a traditional run-of-the-mill policy, regardless of what somebody's putting in, we'll use $10,000 as an example. If somebody's putting in $10,000 a year, in year one, there wouldn't be anything sitting in the cash value available to use in a traditional policy. And then in year two, they put in another 10,000, they might see 2,000 or 3,000 become available. In year three, it gets a little bit better. And their break-even point really wouldn't happen until year 13, 14, 15. And so what we're doing is the IRS has very specific guidelines for what an insurance policy can look like without becoming what's called a modified endowment contract. And basically what a modified endowment contract is if we cross over that limit, the government or the IRS says, hey, that's not an insurance policy anymore. We think that's an investment. And so then they're going to start taxing you on that insurance policy growth. Well, what we're doing is we're reducing all of the costs that we can, one of those main drivers being the death benefit. And then we're overfunding the policy with as much cash as possible up to that limit that the IRS has set, which is the modified endowment contract. And by doing that, we create a much more efficient vehicle by optimizing the cash growth. So you saw on the webinar, or the screen that we shared, $10,000 goes in year one. And instead of zero being there, you'd have anywhere from $7,500 to $8,000 available to use right away. And then in year two, those costs drop off even more. 10,000 goes in, 8,500 to 9,000 becomes available. And by year three, every dollar that we put into the policy then becomes cash value and available for to use. And every year after that, it just keeps growing higher and higher. So that's really the main difference, is just how the policy is built. A good analogy to use, maybe real quick, is looking, you know, if you were to look at a Chevy Camaro and a Honda Civic, and you were to pop the hoods on those two cars, you'd see a lot of the same components. But because of the way that those components are put together, one will be much more efficient than the other. And so that's really what it is just how we're building the policies.
Guys, Brad's asking, how can I tell if my existing policy would work if I started to max fund it?
Yeah, so part of that just depends on how it was set up initially. And there are some specific riders that we're using to get to the kinds of things that Brendan's talking about in terms of efficiency of growing the cash. We're using a term rider alongside because that's one of the tools we have to get the insurance to the level to qualify as, under the IRS's definition of life insurance, but keep the costs lower. So that would be one thing. If you look at it and you have a term rider, that's a good sign. The second thing is we're overfunding it. And inside of whole life insurance, there's a rider. Mostly it's called a paid up additions rider. Each company may call it something a little bit different, but the idea is that we can just overfund it. We can put more money into it than we need to for the sake of just the pure insurance part of it. So if you have those two riders, then you're probably in good shape that you can potentially start overfunding it. We're more than happy to help you look at it and evaluate it and see, if it is something that you can just start putting more money into. Unfortunately, those elements would have to have been built into it from the beginning in order to qualify. So hopefully that's the case, but we'd have to look at it and see.
Rod, perhaps you can speak to this as well, but when I first started my policy, my grandmother in her infinite wisdom had bought a policy through New York Life for all the grandkids and funded it with an amount up front. And it was it was at a time when the interest rates were likely very high and the insurance company was promising incredible returns. You'd never have to put another dime in the policy and on and on. And then we realized that it actually was not a good policy. It was not written well. There were a lot of commissions there. And so we ended up, and I believe the term is 1035ing it, where you can roll one of your existing policies into a new policy that may be more suitable for investment optimization like you're talking about. Can you speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. So people may be familiar with the 1031 exchange in real estate, kind of carrying value over into the next property. In this case, the 1035 exchange does something similar. It allows you to move cash value, move money that's inside of an existing policy into a new policy without any tax consequence for doing that. And in this case, where there's a very specific design that is optimal. So in your case, Adam, different than what your grandma had envisioned when she first set it up. It can be very advantageous to take what you have, move it over, gives you kind of a boost going into the new policy. But again, we still design it optimized to grow that cash value. So it's going to grow new cash going into it optimally, but it's also going to make more out of the dollars that we're moving over from the other policy because there's a lower cost burden associated with those now. So it can be advantageous, and we don't just always assume that every policy should be have a 1035 exchange move into a new policy. We'll look at it carefully with you and compare it, make sure that it's wise to do. But it certainly can be a benefit.
Wonderful. Lily asks, will a custom whole life insurance policy work to use in the program? She has it with New York Life as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe it's helpful to go through how we operate as well. So the way we operate is we have a list of about a dozen different mutual life insurance companies. In order to make our list, they've got to be A-rated companies, financially strong, consistent in paying dividends, and they need to have been around at least 100 years. And if they meet that criteria, New York Life being one of those companies, and same with Guardian, then what we will do is we'll compare everyone's whole life insurance policy we'll optimize every whole life policy, and whichever policy is producing the most efficient growth in the cash value, that's the company that we're committed to using for our clients. And so we keep track of that list on a yearly basis and make sure we compare those policies. And so, yes, a New York Life policy would absolutely work. Again, we just want to make sure that policy was built in a way that you can overfund it and in a way that it's optimized for cash value. So New York Life is a great company. So is Guardian. It's just all in how the policy was originally set up. And again, we're happy to look at it and go through that with you as well.
Awesome. These are great questions, everybody. Keep them coming.
Yeah, and the good news is that it's really easy to do, because what we can do is take an original illustration for what was run on your policy, run it side by side with an illustration on the policy that we would recommend, and we just compare them so you can see, side by side how they look, how they compare.
Love that. Lily's asking, what's the best way to contact you guys?
Great question. So our website is moneyinsights.net. I think Nick's going to pop that up there. Email, you can just do rod@moneyinsights.net or brennan@moneyinsights.net. And so we can respond directly to you that way. We have a lot of good content. We have a podcast. We have, a lot of different ways that you can become, familiar with us and learn more about kind of the stuff that we're doing. So feel free to check any of that stuff out as well.
Thank you, Rod. Benjamin, I see your hand up. You want to chime in and ask a question?
Yeah, this is Benjamin. My question is there a specific bank you can recommend? And what's the current interest rate?
Good question. So we have a list of 8 to 10 banks that we know do this. Depending on how long you've had your policy, I think one that's really good to look at is the Bancorp, BANCORP. They've been really good to work with. Another one is called Coastal States Bank. And what they do is they'll take prime minus a percentage to determine how much interest is that they're going to charge. So for example, with the Bancorp, if you have a cash value up to 100,000, then they're going to take prime minus a half point. So up until today, I guess I haven't seen what the Fed did today, but it was prime has been 4.75. So you take that, so it'd be 4.25 if your cash value is less than 100,000. Once you're more than 100,000, then it's prime minus 1%. So you'd be at 3.75. And once the cash value gets above $1 million, then it's 1.2 prime minus 1.25. So volume makes a difference on that, but it's linked to prime. And I've seen that consistently over the other banks as well that we've looked at.
Here is what's really powerful about that too, for just to connect the dots for everybody. If you are a real estate investor and you have rental properties, you have a commercial building, and you're looking to shred those, a lot of our clients are coming back to us saying, hey, as it turns out, I can't get a HELOC on a rental property. They might be able to get a BLOC, a business line of credit, on the LLC. But the challenge with that is it's going to have a higher interest rate because they're typically, they're just attached to your business, right? Your business line of credit, as opposed to what Rod is talking about in a cash value line of credit. The collateral is actual cash, which is why the interest rate is less, because the risk is less for the lending institution. So even if you had $50,000 in a policy, or for that matter, $20,000 in a policy, and you were able to go get a cash value line of credit in order to shred a commercial mortgage, you'd be money ahead, like significantly money ahead. So the functionality of this, the usability of it, the flexibility of it, just can't be overstated. Great question. Brad's asking, how does the cost of the insurance and commission compare to term?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. Yep. So there's a few things to think about there. When you're funding a whole life insurance policy like this, typically when it's optimized, you're going to have access to 100% of the capital that you've put into it by about year 5 or 6. And so with traditional term life insurance, those dollars are similar to an auto insurance policy, in that if you don't wreck your car, there's no benefit to be paid. Whereas with a whole life insurance policy, what we're utilizing it for is just completely different than a traditional term life insurance policy, in that we're planning to use the capital that we put into the policy to then go out and invest in real estate. But maybe to answer that question a little bit more directly, and I think what you're getting at, if I'll think of one insurance company in particular, if the total dividend of the insurance company is 3% contractually guaranteed plus a 2.75% dividend, so you're getting a total of a 5.75% growth in the policy. Looking out at over the last 10 or 15 years of having a policy, if you looked at the internal rate of return, your IRR is going to be hovering right around 5%. So total growth of 5.75, your IRR being 5, meaning you have about 75 to 80 basis points of cost inside of that policy. And so that's the costs in an insurance policy are always front loaded. So the majority of those costs come off in the first year or two. But looking at the long run of the policy, it's right around 75 to 80 basis points of cost. But it's still a 5% return.
And the thing I would say is we think of term as serving just a different purpose. So for example, I'll use myself as an example. I have a couple of these whole life policies that I use. I invest, take loans and go out and invest. And that provides a certain amount of insurance, but I also have term insurance to make up the difference so that those who are counting on me, my family and my business partners, whatnot, are taken care of if something were to happen to me. So again, when we're working with people, we kind of look at both sides. We're going to optimize the dollars going in that we're trying to grow, that we want to use for investing, et cetera. And then we'll look and say, okay, therefore it creates this death benefits, and that's insurance I don't have to pay for any other way. Kind of to Brennan's point, I'm actually creating a return off of those dollars. But then when I look at the actual insurance need for those that are counting on me, I also want to make sure that I'm covering that as well. So that's pretty common for people that we work with to have both.
Have you ever gotten better questions, you guys? I feel like these are
These fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really good.
I want to project out just to give people a sense of what's possible. And I'm going to give you two scenarios. So you use Shred and you get to a point where let's say you're 2 years in on using the Shred method, and you've created a ton of equity in the property and you've got a ton of liquidity on your line of credit. And at that point, you begin overfunding this cash value or max funding the cash value policies. And let's say that after about, 5 years, you have, actually not even that. Let's say after another 2 years, you have $100,000 in that policy in cash, sitting there ready to be leveraged. And at that point in time, your mortgage balance is about 70 or 80,000, still on an amortized payment. So you might be paying $1,500 to $2,000 a month on your mortgage payment. You could theoretically borrow the money out of your policy, plunk it down on your mortgage, and have no mortgage payment. And at that point, all of your income is now funneling back into the policy to just refill that bucket. So in effect, the policy itself can become a Shred tool, a Shred account, like the acceleration account in our software. Another example would be, let's say you get to a point where you have the mortgage paid off, you have $500,000 in a policy, you deploy 300,000 or 400,000 of it at a time into real estate syndications, and you live off the other 100,000 a year by borrowing it out and just living on it month by month. But every single dime of income you're making from the syndications is going back in to fill that bucket back up. So we can create all sorts of scenarios that I think will help you build wealth, help you blast away debt, and help you become more efficient with your income. And what I will say is, I think you got to be surrounded by people like this who are thinking just a little bit outside the box on how you do these investments. Because the one benefit that I love the most about this policy is you get to decide when, how, and if it's paid back. Right? The goal is to always put the money back in, but you get to decide when the payments are made. You get to decide how the payments are made. You get to decide if it's paid back in full or if you just continually borrow against it. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, guys.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, that is one of the really nice things about it.
So that idea of like when, how, and if is if you invest in a property and you go the traditional route, I'm going to put 20% down and then a big loan against it. There is cash flow that's coming out of your pocket to cover the debt service that you have on that property. Whereas if you pulled it out of your policy, there really is no expected payment on that quote unquote debt service, right? There is going to be a payment made over time. There is interest being charged against it, but there's no monthly payment. So you really have full control of the cash flow you're making on those investments.
And I'll just add to that, the interest that is accruing, it actually only accrues once a year. So even if you're only making a once a year payment, you're still keeping that interest simple. So that helps.
Well, I know we're near the top of the hour here. Oh, that's right. Nick, thank you for the reminder. Romania is interested in the short-term rental opportunity. And just FYI for everybody else, we are doing another topical call just like this on the 23rd of August. And this one is about short-term rentals and all the varying aspects of short-term rentals. Nick just put the link in the chat box. So if you want to register for that call, we have a guy named Kirby who is a brilliant short-term rental guy. And we love doing these calls because our goal with Shred is to really, I said it before, open your eyes to some of the possibilities that traditional financial planning is probably not going to show you. And yet, as both Rod and Brendan have alluded to, these are companies that have been around for 100+ years. My policy is with Mass Mutual. I think Mass is 120 or 140 years old or something like that. So these aren't fly-by-night companies that are doing this. This is long-standing. Some of the wealthiest families in the world are using these policies to build wealth. So make sure you pay close attention to what these guys have to say. Join us on August 23rd. Any final thoughts, guys, or things that we ought to be thinking about as we walk away from this?
I would just say it's been a pleasure being with you. And like you said, the questions speak a lot to just the level of intelligence and commitment of just kind of really being engaged and thinking through things. So thank you all for letting us join you.
All right, getting lots of thanks in the chat box. We appreciate your guys's, certainly appreciate your guys' time and energy and intelligence on this thing. Again, if you are interested in getting in touch with either one of these guys, Rod at moneyinsights.net or Brennan, BRENYN at moneyinsights.net is the best place to go. And if the goal is just to like chat through some options, know that you can also connect with myself or Nick, and we'll get questions answered for you. You can hit us up at either hello@theshredmethod.com or individually Adam at or Nick at theshredmethod.com. So with that, gentlemen, thanks for the time tonight, and everybody else, have a great evening, and thanks for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Take care.
See everybody.